Today, there are many updates from the Avdiivka direction. The central part of the region witnessed the most intense clashes. The increase in the intensity of attacks was rapid, as the region had sporadic Russian reconnaissance-in-force operations over the last weeks. As you may recall, when Russian forces entered the territory of the Demolished Industrial Zone, they put themselves in a very inconvenient situation. All buildings were already destroyed by artillery fire, and the Russian infantry had little to no cover from Ukrainian fire. The industrial zone quickly became a kill zone, and Russian forces incurred substantial losses in their attempts to consolidate control over the region. That is why, as reported by Russian sources, Russian forces decided to take time to regroup and prepare fresh troops to resume assault operations. While waiting for these reinforcements, Russian troops that were holding the positions in the industrial zone received supplies via the first Russian ground drones. This way, they could minimize the exposure and, therefore, losses from Ukrainian drone attacks. Unfortunately for Russians, Ukrainian fighters recently published a video showing that they finally found and destroyed it. To distract Ukrainian forces and draw their attention away from the Russian bridgehead, Russian forces started attacking Ukrainian positions in the forest north of the industrial zone. Russian sources published a video showing how they are shelling Ukrainian fortifications. Simultaneously, it was reported that the reinforcements continued to arrive at this front to restart the ground operations. Today, some Russian sources claimed that Russians finally resumed ground operations and penetrated the Ukrainian defense west of the industrial zone by hundreds of meters. Russian sources claimed that Ukrainians were caught by surprise and had to retreat along Kolosova Street. It is important to note that there is still no visual evidence of such a success. The Ukrainian side reported that even though the number of Russian assaults spiked, Russian assault units failed to achieve any success and were completely eliminated. Moreover, Ukrainians were tightly controlling the accumulation of Russian troops in the region. Ukrainian fighters from the famous 110th Mechanized Brigade showed how they targeted Russian forces' concentrations. In order to undermine Russian offensive capabilities, drone pilots destroyed one howitzer, 2 tanks, and multiple small infantry groups. Ukrainian fighters from the Border Guard detachment were also heavily concentrated in this region. Geolocated footage shows that they managed to destroy another tank, an armored vehicle, a howitzer, a small ammunition depot, and a group of soldiers. So, the front line in this region is stable. In fact, the entire Avdiivka front line has stabilized over the last month, especially along the southern line, where Russians have not generated any gains over the last 7 weeks. That is why the Russian High Command continues to characterize Russian offensive efforts in Avdiivka as active defense. It is interesting that the confidence of the Russian command in their ability to take Avdiivka was low from the very beginning, so in an effort to temper expectations, they call it active defense, despite the fact that Ukrainian forces have never conducted offensive operations at scale in the Avdiivka area since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Since it has already become clear that Russian forces will definitely not be able to take Avdiivka by the end of the year, Russians have already started using the active defense framing to recontextualize the lack of any major Russian progress around Avdiivka. Several days ago, some of the most prominent Russian sources started claiming that the Avdiivka offensive was just a decoy and that taking it is not the main Russian goal. And this is not surprising because out of the allocated 40,000 troops as reserves for the Avdiivka offensive, approximately 13,000 of them are already dead or wounded. It seems like the Russian command is not confident that the remaining 27,000 troops will be enough to close the pocket, which is why they are trying to deprioritize this direction, meaning that, so far, the Ukrainian defensive operation is going according to the plan.